Okay, so two major stories broke today that we've got to talk about. The first is that Team Penske has suspended 4 key team members on the number 2 and number 12 Indy cars in the wake of the St. Petersburg scandal in which push-to-pass was used when it was not supposed to be. That caused the stripping of the win from Joseph Newgarden, as well as the disqualification of Scott McLaughlin. So we'll be talking about that, as well as the fact that Formula One, TV ratings-wise, and yes, there are a couple of caveats, but the numbers don't lie. 3.1 million people tuned in to the F1 Miami Grand Prix, and that is the biggest TV rating Formula One has ever had in the United States. It comes in the month of May, which is a month in which typically we're not supposed to be thinking about Formula One. In fact, we're really probably not even supposed to be thinking about NASCAR, and yet here we are, and I'm going to talk about that. But first, we've got to get to this Team Penske thing because it's significant in who has been suspended. The names are huge, and they are significant for the defending winner of the Indianapolis 500, Joseph Newgarden. Let's take a look at the first statement, which was released by Team Penske. Following the penalties to the Team Penske drivers after the Long Beach Grand Prix, Team Penske completed an internal review. After a full and comprehensive analysis of the information, Team Penske has determined that there were significant failures in our processes and internal communications. As a result, Luke Mason, the number 2 race engineer, and Robbie Atkinson, senior data engineer, will be suspended from Team Penske for the next 2 IndyCar races, including the Indianapolis 500. In addition, Ron Rosinski, managing director of Team Penske IndyCar, will also be suspended for these 2 races, along with Tim Cindric, the president of Team Penske, who has accountability for all of Team Penske's operations. This statement comes from Roger Penske, which was released at the same time as the statement from Team Penske. I recognize the magnitude of what occurred and the impact it continues to have on the sport which I dedicated so many decades. Everyone at Team Penske, along with our fans and business partners, should know that I apologize for the errors that were made, and I deeply regret them. There was also a statement released by Penske Racing President Tim Cindric, who was suspended for 2 races in the wake of this controversy. For Ron and I, as leaders of this team, it's not about what we did, it's about what we didn't do. It's our responsibility to provide the team and all of our drivers with the right processes to ensure something like this can't happen. For that, I apologize to Roger, our team, and everyone that supports us. Our number 1 job is to protect and enhance the reputation of our brand, and that of those that support us. In that regard, as the overall leader, I failed, and I must raise my hand and be accountable with the others. This is a team, and in my position, it's the right thing to do. So obviously, this is a huge suspension from Team Penske, and it's kind of interesting how it's worded, and it's kind of interesting of how it seems to have gone down. It seems there are 2 names here, both Atkinson and Mason, who have been blamed for this error, and they have been suspended and for that error. And Rosinski and Cindric seemingly have taken the fall as well as leaders of the team, not necessarily either of those 2 admitting guilt. That's how I interpret this. And certainly Tim Cindric said it himself in his statement that it's his responsibility to stick up and keep up on these things, and he did not do that, and therefore takes a suspension. But all of this being said, my understanding is that all of these gentlemen who have been suspended will not be allowed anywhere near Indianapolis, even in the Indianapolis area. They will not be allowed in any kind of direct contact with the team, though I believe they're still allowed in the race shop itself. And I don't know about text messages or calls, but you would imagine that those will probably be coming in, though obviously, when you look at Ron Rosinski, who is the strategist for Will Power, the 12 car, and I might remind you that Will Power was the only driver of the 3 Penske teams to not use the push-to-pass during St. Pete, and also Tim Cindric. In fact, the entire pit box for the number 2 for Joseph Newgarden has been completely eliminated. It's going to be a completely different team for the Indy GP as well as the Indianapolis 500. And for Joseph Newgarden, you think about the title defense, the defense of his Indianapolis 500. And that's become a very difficult prospect because Tim Cindric, you know, whatever you want to say about him, and surely I think there's going to be a lot of comments about, you know, right or wrong with Tim Cindric, but Cindric is one of the best strategists in the business. There's a reason he's been up on that box. There's a reason Roger Penske trusts him as much as he does, because he's a hell of a prospect. He's a hell of a guy in this sport who's, you know, has a proven track record of being able to be one of the best strategists in the business. And the Indy 500, the current way it is, it's not necessarily the fastest car that wins the race. A lot of times you have to strategize. You have to, you know when to sit in line and fuel save for 30 laps and when to pit and how to overcut and undercut properly. All of those decisions are now going to be thrust upon someone different for the two drivers on Team Penske, which have won the Indy 500 before. The only box that's staying the same and consistent is Scott McLaughlin's, which, you know, if you look at Roger Penske, this is a significant penalty from his perspective because he's chasing win number 20 in the Indianapolis 500. There's no doubt about that. And he has essentially kneecapped himself before the biggest race. I mean, it's so hard to say because certainly, you know, if you saw the Michael Andretti interview with Kenny Wallace, you definitely got the impression that Michael Andretti thinks that Roger had something to do with this. Although he did not say as much, he definitely implied it with his words without directly saying it, as well as, you know, some facial features when Kenny Wallace would say things like, I don't think Roger had anything to do with this. You know, Michael even went as far as to say he would have fired his Tim Cindric equivalent, who is Rob Edwards, on the Andretti team. So, you know, I think there's still... The problem with this is that Roger, you know, and I think Roger is in a very difficult position, but unfortunately it's a position he's kind of put himself into. I think this is a totally different scenario if IndyCar wasn't in the state that it's in. If IndyCar is, say, you know, is really on the rise. I mean, we you know, you can hear the PR statements, but let's be honest. Let's look at the TV ratings. Let's look at the interaction on social media. Let's look at the hype around the races. IndyCar is in a rut right now. There's no doubt about it. I think if we're being intellectually honest with ourselves, we know this. If IndyCar is doing what Formula One or even NASCAR is doing right now, which is rising, you know, everybody's kind of content and happy, making money, this would have been a scandal, but Roger would have had a little bit of leeway with the fans and the teams and the drivers, you know, to make it right. Well, being in the vulnerable position that Roger is in, this really couldn't have happened at a worse time. I don't know if there's enough that Roger can do, save for sell the series, maybe, I guess, because that's what Michael Andretti keeps referring to. But to actually, you know, solve this or resolve this with the competitors. I mean, you know, Roger's in a really, really tough spot. I don't envy him in this one because he's essentially, and you know, we could be sitting here 20 days from now and saying, oh, well, Penske won another Indy 500, but you know, he's put himself in a very difficult position to repeat an Indy 500 win here with these suspensions. And I'm curious if it's going to be enough. And certainly, you know, you look at, it is curious as well that this came from the team and not IndyCar. I can only imagine that Penske essentially said to IndyCar, which is weird to say because Penske owns IndyCar, right? But like Team Penske said to IndyCar, you know, we'll conduct our own investigation. We'll make, you know, dole out punishment, and it's up to you guys to find out whether and decide whether or not the punishment fits the crime. Obviously, IndyCar themselves punished Penske by taking away the race win at St. Pete and the points from the 3-car as well from St. Pete. You know, again, I get the sense in looking at comments that the fans, a lot of the fans, aren't satisfied with this. And you know, I kind of get the impression as well that the competitors probably aren't satisfied with this. But, you know, I don't know. There comes a point when what else can Roger do, right? What else can he do realistically and within the bounds of what he himself has said, which is, I'm not selling the series. Liberty Media can give me, you know, $100 million. I'm not selling the series, you know? So I just don't see what else Roger can do at this point. I mean, he suspended Tim Cindric. I don't think firing Tim, you know, because I think a lot of people were like, oh, you should fire Tim Cindric. firing Tim Cindric was never going to be on the table in a million years. You know, right or wrong, Tim Cindric was not going away from Team Penske. He has literally been brought up by Roger and primed to take over the team. He is the succession plan for Roger Penske with his race team. You're not going to throw away that much development since 1999 on something that has been, you know, believable or not, shown to be or at least in Team Penske's mind, shown to be an innocent mistake with no malicious intent, as Roger Penske has said in a couple of different articles. You know, if you keep saying that, you keep showing this, you know, I just don't know. You know, I don't know how you can do anything else. And Roger's not going to fire Cindric. So, and that's, I think, what some people want. I think people want heads to roll, and I understand, but I just don't think it's going to happen. I think this is it. And, you know, it is a penalty. It is definitely a punishment, and they are punishing the team because the defending Indianapolis 500 winner has essentially been winged before the race even starts. And even Will Power, who really didn't do anything worthy of punishment, has been punished by losing the strategist on his box, Ron Rosinski. So yeah, it's very odd times in IndyCar, and we'll get back to IndyCar here in a second because I want to talk about the Formula One TV ratings. Now, I think we need to talk a few caveats before we look at the number. First of all, this was on ABC TV, which got 2.2 million viewers last year. This year, they had a lead-in from an NBA Game 7. It was the Orlando Magic and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not necessarily two huge markets, mind you. These aren't necessarily, it's not like the LA Lakers are taking on the New York Knicks, right? Well, that would be a finals, but you know what I mean, right? These are not the biggest markets. So the TV rating for that game wouldn't necessarily be huge, but that being said, the Formula One TV rating was up significantly. And yes, NASCAR was rain delayed. That probably had a little something to do with it as well. But again, ball don't lie, okay? TV rating, when it's this high, it don't lie. Especially when you look at last year and know that they were over 2 million. And the Miami Grand Prix, the largest U.S. TV audience in history, 3.1 million viewers on average. It actually peaked at 3.6. And actually the F1 sprint race, which might even be more representative of what a Formula One audience can be on Saturday against the Kentucky Derby, against, you know, a lot of other things on television on that day, got 946,000 viewers on a Saturday for a sprint race. So this is concerning for a lot of reasons if you are a U.S. sports fan. This is the first time, I think maybe ever, that on the same day Formula One has outdrawn NASCAR. Again, NASCAR was rain delayed, but it wasn't like NASCAR was super rain delayed to the point where it was detrimental. And in fact, the end of the NASCAR race, I think kind of spilled over into prime time. And you looked at the finish of the NASCAR race, and it was this spectacular green, white checker finish, which everybody tells me everybody wants to see in racing. Ultimately got a smaller TV rating than the Formula One race. I think the NASCAR race was also on Fox Sports 1. That also needs to be taken into consideration. Had it been on Fox, the rating might have been bigger. But, yeah, take nothing away from Formula One on this one, I think. Formula One, you know, all the people who tuned into basketball could have very easily turned off Formula One. They didn't. You heard the peak was 3.6. One could imagine that was around the start of the race. But you only lost a couple 100,000 from the point that the race started to the end of the race. And so from my perspective, this is a huge win for Formula One. And the fact that they did have a race where the winner was not Max Verstappen. It was a first-time winner, a popular first-time winner with Lando Norris. The race itself, I thought, was fairly entertaining by F1 standards, obviously. Again, the race is probably secondary or third in terms of importance to Formula One fans, which, you know, that's fine. But I think, I look at this from a different perspective, obviously, because I come at it from primarily an IndyCar angle. And when you say the month of May, you think, when you're thinking through an IndyCar lens, an IndyCar bubble, you're thinking of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you're thinking of IndyCar racing. And it's crazy to me that Formula One can get its largest TV rating ever, and frankly, 3.1 million. You're a couple million off at this point, but you're starting to creep up towards that Indy 500 rating. I'm not saying that's going to be a super competitive contest, for the next several years, but I think you get a little bit nervous. You start to pull your neck collar a little bit when you're IndyCar, and you see the completely sagging TV ratings. In fact, I saw a stat, and I'm going to say it because again, it's numbers, right? The F1 TV rating for Miami has beaten all of the IndyCar races combined for the entire year. Yikes. I think it's difficult because you're not going to get 3.1 million viewers on anything but the Indy 500 if you're IndyCar. But that being said, I think they have to fill the entire month of May with on-track content. I think it's kind of funny because there was a point in time where I think it made sense to only do 2 weeks. It made sense for the Indy 500 to take a couple of weeks off. I don't think that is the case anymore. I think in our TikTok, short attention span society, I think that you need to have, especially in your peak month, which is the month of May, you have to have content on the racetrack every weekend. And, I don't care about parties. I don't care about the Kentucky Derby. I frankly don't care about Formula One if I'm IndyCar. I have to prioritize my series. And, you can do that in different ways. You can put the Grand Prix as the first weekend. You can move the April test down to the first weekend. Maybe maybe find a way. I think I saw J.R. Hildebrand on Twitter had a really interesting concept of cutting Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays out of practice and doing a 2-week format where you have qualifying 2 weekends again. I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think you just have to bring content out and keep it in front of people, especially this month. And it's disappointing, especially watching the IndyCar TV ratings just tank throughout the year. Now, I will make a bold prediction that unless it's weather impacted, I think the Indy 500 TV rating will be up this year. I think Kyle Larson will help that. The intrigue around him will help that. But certainly that won't help the rest of the series because the draw of this year's Indy 500 is a driver who does not race in IndyCar. So I just think you just got to keep the content train rolling. And sometimes you notice that IndyCar, and it's crazy because IndyCar had a race, well, now it's 2 weekends ago, right? But Barber feels like it happened an age ago. St. Petersburg, which we are still breaking news and talking about today in May, happened, 2.5 months ago? So I guess St. Pete gave us a lot of content, but we're not necessarily talking about on-track stuff. We're not talking about stuff that actually makes people tune in. I mean, we saw from Barber, the drama didn't really help interest level, did it? So I don't know, man. It's I think you've got to control the month of May if you're IndyCar, and I think the schedule and two, I don't necessarily need to make a whole video about Zach Brown, but one of his points that he made, he made a couple of really obvious points, like make the podiums more exciting. But the scheduling was a big thing that he talked about, and I agree. The schedule has to. They have to take a real long, hard look at the scheduling for next year. They got to find a way to better, spread the content out, particularly in the month of May. There should, again, like I said, there should not be a weekend without a race car going around that racetrack in one direction or another. I'm not saying get rid of the Grand Prix, but I'm saying you need, I think, 3 weekends of oval stuff, not 2. I think you need to add a weekend somewhere where cars are going around that oval just to try to drive a little bit more interest, keep people engaged. That's the important thing. Keep people engaged, remind them that it's happening, it's coming, all of this stuff. So, yeah, it's an interesting day, but the good news is we do have IndyCar racing this weekend, and you know, finally next week we get onto the oval and we can actually start talking about the big business, which is the Indianapolis 500 and the 108th running. So I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to covering it for you. Got a lot of content coming. Can't wait for you to see it all. We'll see you in the next video.